Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this much anticipated FEI event, and thank you for joining us. I'm Kim Davis, one of the FEI board members, and I can tell you that we have been talking about this event all year. We were very disappointed earlier the year when we had to cancel due to the pandemic, but today we will get a virtual look at the $115 million restoration of the Enoch Pratt Free Library from the local architect firm Ayers Saint Gross, or ASG, that led the project. This library means so much to the Baltimore community, and especially now is a beautiful symbol of equality and access to all. So I'm really excited that you all could be here today to take this look at this project. Before I introduce our speakers this morning, though, I do want to mention our next event coming up on October 8th at 5 p.m. In partnership with the Boys and Girls Club of Metro Baltimore, we're hosting a webinar on wealth planning in the current economic environment. So a very, very timely topic here. Michael Mendelson from Blackstone will be giving us his insights on the current macroeconomic landscape, the state of U.S. real estate markets, and where he sees opportunity for investment. So you really don't want to miss this. Before I introduce our presenters from ASG, I do want to remind everyone that there will be polling questions popping up throughout the presentation this afternoon. Please be sure to answer those if you need CPE credit. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our presenters from ASG. First, we have Christine Hurt. She is the Principal and Chief Financial Officer. She has more than 30 years of diverse experience managing accounting, HR, and IT functions in the built environment for businesses ranging from $20 million to $200 million in revenue. She is currently on the Board of Trustees of the Baltimore Chamber Orchestra. Welcome, Christine. Glad to have you. Daniel Lucenti, AIA. Daniel is an associate and licensed architect. He has broad experience partnering with institutional and commercial clients throughout the country on a variety of projects. A talented designer, Daniel believes in creating environments of excellence that synthesize aesthetic and programmatic project goals. Welcome, Daniel. Lindsay Story. Lindsay is an associate principal and creative director of the graphic design team. With 16 years of experience in graphic design, she has worked on projects ranging from signage and wayfinding for the Monticello Visitor Center to a pocket-sized pop-up book. In addition to client work, Lindsay is the keeper of the Ayers Saint Gross brand and works to promote brand consistency and design excellence firm-wide. Welcome to all of our speakers at ASG. And Christine, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, welcome to today's presentation, Behind the Design, Enoch Pratt Free Library. Our Behind the Design series of webinars is presented by our design professionals to give insight into the design process to other design teams at Ayers Saint Gross, and just to highlight cool projects completed by our firm. You all are lucky to be getting this presentation today because they're normally given internally. Ayers Saint Gross is 100% employee-owned. We are a design firm offering a full suite of design services: architecture, landscape architecture, graphic design, planning, interiors, and space analysis. Our 180 employees are primarily located in Baltimore, but we have locations in DC, Tempe, Arizona, and remote employees everywhere. Our projects have an international reach for clients with mission-driven focus in higher education and cultural institutions. Ayers Saint Gross's mission is to engage people and places to create designs that enrich our world. This mission is realized every day with projects such as the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore. I hope you enjoy the presentation. Dan and Lindsay?
Welcome, everyone. So our first polling question is, Ayers Saint Gross main office is located in which city? And this is, I guess, pre-COVID, as Christine did mention that we do have 3 main offices and a bunch of remote offices, but I guess everybody's remote these days, so so pre-COVID.
I should have put everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, great. So it seems like everyone's getting those in.
And they've been listening.
Yep. And so Baltimore is correct. So Baltimore is our headquarters. our main campus, and we do have those other satellite offices. So all right, let's we'll get into the presentation. One thing that I did want to say is that, you know, feel free to put your questions in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, and ask questions throughout the presentation. The beauty of, or I guess, being in person, it would have been a little bit easier, especially being able to see the Pratt and doing this. But you know, doing this virtually doesn't mean that you can't do the same thing. I do want to recommend or suggest that everybody go visit the library once it's, you know, open, and once we're through this pandemic, so that you can actually see the impressive design that, you know, took place. It's definitely breathtaking to see it in person. But we'll go through some of the pictures. So this is a little bit about behind the design. So for the Enoch Pratt Free Library, this quote is directly from their website. The purpose of the renovation project is to preserve the past and position the Central Library, State Library Resource Center to serve Marylanders in the future. And that's exactly what this construction project, you know, set out to do. Sort of design and construction was to bring the library back up to modern times and make it, you know, relevant to today's environment. So we'll go a little bit over the history and the project timeline, some of the design and construction. So we'll go through that sort of virtual tour, and I'll talk to some of the images, construction and finished images. And then Lindsay will walk through the graphic and signage portion of it, which had a huge impact on the library itself. And then some lead and awards. And again, we'll do questions, and, you know, throughout or at the end, that's okay too. So just kind of to situate everyone. So this is downtown Baltimore. You can see the Inner Harbor here in the middle of the image. Ayers Saint Gross is located over here at Tide Point, our Baltimore office. And the Enoch Pratt Free Library is located up here, further north. So not too far from our office, right in the heart of the city. Zooming in a little bit closer, the Enoch Pratt Library has two sort of sections to it. One is the main central branch, which you can see in my virtual background. That's that one highlighted in yellow. And the other one is the annex, sort of an addition that was added on. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's this one highlighted in blue. And then you can sort of, again, to reorient yourself, it's situated in front of the Baltimore Basilica, and Mercy Medical is over here towards the right. So the timeline for the Pratt Library is rooted in history, but also in our firm's history. It started back in 1882. It was established, not where it's currently located, but it's a much larger branch that has a couple different, you know, locations. The Central Library, the one that we're talking about today, was actually designed and built in 1933, around that time. So when it was built with, you know, the technology and the construction of that time. So there's many things that the library didn't necessarily include in today's standards, but it was up to code, and it worked back in when it was first constructed. It went through a couple of series of renovations and additions throughout the years. So if we keep moving forward in the timeline, in 1983, they renovated the library and brought it to modern times at that time, and added some mezzanines. And that design was actually done by a firm in Connecticut, Perry Dean Rogers, with Ayers Saint Gross and architect. And so this young architect from Perry Dean Rogers was Adam Gross. You know, you may know Adam Gross. You know, he's the Gross in Ayers Saint Gross, but at that time in 1983, Ayers Saint Gross was just Ayers Saint. And so they did this mezzanine renovation. They did this design and construction, and they were really impressed with this architect that Richard Ayers and Kelsey Saint invited Adam Gross to join the firm at that time as a partner. And that's when in 1984, in 1985, Ayers Saint became Ayers Saint Gross. And that's the firm that we have today. So that, again, that's why our firm is actually, more than 100 years old, and it's gone through a few name changes, but in the heart, it's always been Ayers Saint Gross. So moving forward, again, the library had these mezzanines, and it needed more space and needed more records and functions to bring it up to date. And so that's when the annex came in. So in 1998, the contract for the addition and renovation actually was signed. And so the sort of funny thing is that in 1998, the contract was for addition and renovation, large renovation, again, to bring the library up to speed. But the state didn't necessarily have all the money yet to do the renovation, so they just did the addition. And that's why the annex was completed in 2003. But that contract was still valid, and that contract sort of sat on a shelf and kept waiting and waiting until the state of Maryland had enough funds to then pick that contract back up. And they called us back up and they're, hey, remember that project that we were supposed to do, that renovation we were supposed to do back in, the early 90s, early 2000s? Well, we're going to do that now. So, so that contract was picked back up, and we began design for the interior renovation of the library back in the early, 2011, 2012 or so. And then, as you can see here, the construction of that, the actual renovation began in 2016, lasting about 3 years for a renovation to 2019. So this is it. You can see it here, a nighttime shot of it being done. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about the actual design and what actually was completed during that time. But next polling question. So Ayers Saint Gross relationship with the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore spans how many years? Okay, see some answers coming in. That's going great. Couple more seconds to let you put those answers in. Okay, so looks like you have a couple of answers, and everybody answered over 30. That's correct. Yep. So over 30 years. I mean, it's been a long process, and our firm has been involved with the Pratt Library for a long time. It's almost sad to see that contract being done at this point. So, but I don't see it going away in our future. We have such a long-standing relationship with them that hopefully when they decide to do the next modernization or restoration, hopefully in 100 years or so, that this firm will be around to do that. So, all right. Moving a little bit forward. So I'm going to talk about the team that on our side that made this possible. And so Adam Gross there, you can see, I talked about him coming over from Perry Dean Rogers back in the 80s, who is a principal and design leader for our firm, was the principal in charge. And that Mike Barber, who you see here next, he was the project manager for this whole project. And then I was involved. I came in about towards the end of the design, so I wasn't necessarily part of a lot of that design work, but I led the whole construction process from the beginning all the way till we signed that substantial completion. And actually it's still continuing today. Lindsay will talk a little bit about signage later, and she's actually doing a punch list tomorrow for that signage. And then Allie Wilson, who you see here, she was instrumental. She's our lead director. Lead is for energy efficiency program, and so she is our director, and she led that whole effort to get the building certified. And then you see here Lindsay Megan and Jack were instrumental in the design for the signage. And then these are all our partners or consultants that worked on the project. As you can see, it takes, a whole, team to actually get this done. Everything from, so Bayer Blinder Bell was our huge partner. They were our actually renovation architects. So we were the architects for the addition, and Bayer Blinder Bell was the design architect for the renovation. And they, working together throughout this whole process. And so we were the actual managing firm, being the local, Bayer Blinder Bell being out of New York. But DGS, the Department of General Services for Maryland, was our client. And then the Enoch Pratt Free Library is the using agency. So that's usually how these, state-funded projects are set up. They have the client is the state, and then there's a using agency that sort of makes some of these decisions. But the one that's paying the bill is the state. And then there's all these consultants, right, from civil, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, environmental, right? We had to do a lot of these abatements for asbestos and, making sure that it's safe, bringing it up to speed and code. Technology, that's huge, right? So, and then all the code, lighting, acoustics. I mean, if you think it was on this project, because we needed to make sure that this project was a success. And then Gilbane was the contractor, a great contractor that actually made this whole process, or brought the design to fruition, right? A little bit about the opportunities and challenges. I talked about a couple of them, right? The code was one of those things. But this building, being from the 1930s, is actually a historic preservation. It's registered with the historic preservation in Baltimore. And so you can't really touch the exterior facade. The interior is a different story. There's two different types of registrations you can do. One is for the exterior, and then also for exterior and interior. And ours was just for the exterior. So the interior was a little bit more of, that's where the design came in. Like, what do we do? Do we restore it back to what it was? Do we modernize it? Do we change it? And that's, that whole renovation, restoration, modernization. And the concept and the consensus was to restore it, bring it to its former glory, take away some of those, maybe some of those additions that didn't play well with the aesthetics of the building. So restore it to what it was before, but also modernize it and restore it, and then renovate some of the areas to make them more functional for today's standards. So the whole intent of the design for it was to set it up for the next 50 to 100 years. So hopefully they don't have to do another one of these for another, we all like to think that they're forever, but we know that, codes change and things change, technology changes. Technology now is not the same that it was 10 years ago. So what can we invent in the next 50 to 100 years that this library is going to need? So it's designing for the library of the future. So multifunctionality and all that. And I briefly talked about the LEED certification, which we'll go into a little bit later. But the biggest challenge of all is that it was actually built phased while occupied. It was built while it was still in operation. So the library never closed down except for one day where we needed to, run a couple utilities and gas lines. So that was for safety purposes. But the library did not shut down throughout this whole construction process, which is a feat. So you had to phase it, right? So you start on the 4th floor construction while you move some of the offices down. And then as you sort of work your way down, you sort of move other things, open up for public and other locations, which is why it probably took 3 years versus, maybe a year and a half. So I'm not going to read everything, but, there was a bunch of places that we did touch. Actually, there was the whole library was actually renovated. It wasn't just a simple like area and then kind of touching up another area. It was like the whole thing. Places we gutted, and other places where we touched up. IT upgrades, storm windows, furniture, millwork. The exterior, even the exterior was being restored. murals, and I'll go into about a few of those things as we go on. So these images, these were watercolors done, and I can't remember the renderer's name. I think it was Devin Kimmel, but these were done for donor to get funding for the project. So while some of the money was from the state, so the contract started about $80 million from the state, right, state money. And so as you can see, it actually grew to 115 million. Christine will go through a couple of the numbers later. But some of these images and renderings were done of the design to get investors and funders excited about this project and to, good fundraising opportunity. So you'll see some of the images from Central Hall, a job center, children's wing, the Wheeler Auditorium, the teen room, and the popular collections. All these rooms, again, are very impressive in person, so I recommend going to see it. That brings us to our next polling question. Renovating the Enoch Pratt Free Library gave the library the opportunity to upgrade the infrastructure, add functionality for the community, create a more healthy, highly efficient, and cost-saving building, or all of the above. Okay, and we should have some Jeopardy music while we answer these polling questions. Bring that back. Okay, so answers coming in, and good. So the majority of you answered all of the above. Yep, so it is all the above. Upgrading the infrastructure I talked about, bringing it up to code, add functionality for the community. It's a big community project, bringing the public in, create a more healthy, highly efficient and cost-saving building. Yep, so bringing it up to speed, mechanical engineering, all the HVAC systems, the plumbing systems, and then the LEED certification. So all of that applies. So next we'll talk a little bit about the contract, and I'll turn that over to Christine for a little bit. Christine?
Thank you. So in 1998, the contract was signed for the addition and the renovation. And as Daniel pointed out, Ayers Saint Gross led the addition, and Buyer Blinder Bell led the renovation, primarily because they were experts in exterior renovation and renewal. In 2001 to 2003, the addition was constructed at 35 million. But then the project went on hold due to lack of funding for the renovation. As Daniel said, in 2014, the renovation was reactivated. It was reprogrammed and redesigned to meet modern requirements. 2016 to 19, it's that 3-year renovation was completed. It was originally slated to be 86 million. Was the original budget. So that plus the 35 million gets you to approximately the 115 that we were talking about, but the final construction costs were 93 million. The architectural and engineering fee including the redesign. So you can imagine that if your project goes on hold for that long, it took like $5 million in generally redesigning the building. So that took some of the money. But over the 20 years, the architectural engineering fee with all those consultants was about $10 million. The actual construction, actually completing the construction was the rest of the funding. It was primarily state funding, but donors funded the restoration of the decorative ceilings, the painting, the facade restoration, and Lindsay will talk about the donor wall that ended up being a key focal point in the lobby area.
Yep.
Dan?
Thank you, Christine. All right, so now we sort of move into the virtual tour per se. You'll see some, pre-construction photographs, and then construction photographs, and then final. And so I'll walk you through these. So what you see here is the exterior, right? You can see the exterior before it was, very dirty and very gloomy looking. So part of the restoration was to clean the facade, power wash, to put it mildly. There's more technical terms and a lot more was used than just power washing, but also repointing of the whole facade. So it's limestone, and so there's a lot of joints, and so all of those joints were dirty. The windows were dirty, so those were taken off site. And then restored. So they scraped them, repainted them, and then brought them back and installed. The repointing was one of those decisions that were made during construction. Originally, it was supposed to be somewhere around like 60% was set for repointing. So 60% of the facade was to be repointed, not 100%, due to cost-wise. And then when they started getting into it, they realized, okay, we can't just do 60% of this facade because it'll look kind of weird. So they decided, let's spend the extra money to then go ahead and repoint the whole thing. So they stripped out the mortar in between the limestone joints and then went back in and put new ones in. So they matched the color back to what it was. So this on the right, you see, and also my background, you'll see the how clean it was, the transformation. It went from the dirty, from all the soot in the cars and acid rain, to what it is today, cleaned up. Moving forward, so I talked about the Wheeler Auditorium before, and so these are a couple images during construction. So you see that there are spaces where we sort of, I don't want to say gutted, but definitely had to take down a lot of the components that were there so that it was easier to do that and then to put back into place to the way it was. This mold over here to the bottom left is pretty interesting, is the lighting, right? So part of restoring it to what it was also all the lighting fixtures that they had back then. But you can't just go to your Home Depot and say, I want a light from the 1930s or the 1940s. So they had to actually cast these molds because the actual lighting that was there was falling apart. So they had to cast these molds around the existing light and then create that to then be able to cast the new lights and then sort of make replicas of them. And so you see the mold here, and then you can see the new ones installed here on the upper right. The middle image down here is a sort of a mock-up of the colors. So the original colors are the ones that you see in the middle. The reds and the greens and that pinkish color. That was something that they attempted, renovation back in the 80s. They said, oh, it'd be cool to maybe do some different colors. Not the greatest selection, but maybe it was the colors at that time that was the trend. So, but they decided let's bring it back to what it used to be. And so they used historic photographs to sort of come up with those colors. They may not be the exact Pantone color, RGB colors that they were, but they're close enough that, hey, this is what it used to look like. And so this is a final image of the Wheeler Auditorium. All the seats are new, so bringing it up to code, adding the railings on the side, the spaces for the wheelchairs. So ADA is a big important component, American Disability Act. So big part of the code. And then you can see in here, there's, the speakers and actually what you don't see are sprinkler heads, but those are these tiny little caps here are the sprinkler heads. They're concealed. So there were no sprinklers back in 1930s. There are sprinklers now, and so you're making it safe, but you want to conceal that so it doesn't look like there's sprinklers, ruining your perfect shot. So this one is, was one of my kind of progression favorites, is like the sub basement where all the mechanical equipment stuff is. So this one at upper left is sort of the beginning process, and then I took the same image from the same spot as you go along. You see the process of emptying things out, taking everything out, and then starting to put ductwork back in, putting mechanical equipment back in. So that's one of those behind the scenes, what happens in the the basement of the Pratt Library. The next is the multi-purpose room. So this one is you know, another example of where the ceiling was taken down, except for the decorative pieces. And so this decorative piece that goes around, you know, these rectangles was actually restored. So they, again, took some molds off, they took some historic pictures, and then one that was existing and restored those. I mean, someone was there. You can see this guy on the left. He's up there on a scaffold painting these things back into place. So restoring them to what they used to be. And then casting these sort of Rosetta stones in the center, putting those back in. So yeah, a couple of images from construction, some finished images, and then the final, this is what it looks like without some furniture. But again, it's a multi-purpose room, so it was meant to, this room is now meant to host events. And I think this might be where we would have been if we were doing this in person. But moving along to the Edgar Allan Poe room. So I don't have a pre-image of this one, but you can see here on the left, they had the millwork. Again, gutted the ceiling. What you see there is actually terracotta tiles. And so that's what they used to use in construction for fireproofing. Terracotta is great for fireproofing. So wherever there were holes, like you see here in the steel, we had to actually come back and spray fireproof. So our new method of fireproofing is this spray cementitious fireproofing. So that's a little construction tidbit for you all. And then on the right, you see the final completed, or let me go to the next one. And this is the final completed room. So millwork was restored. They took that off site or actually on site, but in a different room, and restored the millwork and brought that back. Again, the light fixtures, same thing. They restored those as well, or replicas. The teen wing, it's probably by far one of my favorite rooms in this library. So when you get to go there, go to the teen wing. There were these murals, and on the ceiling there's this entire decorative painting that happened. And this is one of those where originally they weren't going to restore it. They were going to sort of cover it up in a way that, you know, you can restore it in the future. So it's not cover it up, like get rid of it. It's cover it up so that in the future it can be restored. But then they started looking at it and they said, this is a great space, but do we have the money for it? In the end, they decided it's definitely worth restoring. But just to put it into perspective, it was a $400,000 decision. So it's one of those that, is it going to bring value to the library? And after being in the space, it definitely brings value. So again, you see this guy up here in the scaffolding, again, painting, you know, that whole ceiling, kind of like Michelangelo painting that, you know, the Sistine Chapel up there. So again, this is what it looked like before. You can see that that decorative painting was completely covered up with these ley lights, the lights that came down, and then it got fully restored to what it looks like now with these, you know, the whole decorative painting. One thing that I do want to point out is, again, I pointed out the sprinklers in the other room in the Wheeler Auditorium, but this one, they didn't want to bring the sprinklers through the decorative painting in the middle. That would have been, you know, kind of seeing these little white space dots along the entire ceiling was not going to jive well with the whole ceiling. So they came up with an ingenious idea. You don't see them, right? But they're actually, the whole sprinkler line is running along the entire perimeter of the entire room, right? So these sprinklers are meant to spray out. And so that was an ingenious idea of like putting it in a molding that looks like the whole room so it blends in, but it is also upgrading it to include sprinklers. So moving on to just even a regular hallway in the library can become something beautiful. They had all these decorative features to the ceiling, and then nice marble siding and marble walls, marble footings. But again, we had to gut it in a sense to be able to install all the mechanical equipment, all the piping, the new piping, all that stuff that needed to be put, infrastructure that needed to be put into the library. And again, you know, so it goes from what it was before to what it is now. And again, a simple hallway in this building is not just a hallway. It's beautiful. I talked a little bit about the millwork restoration. Here are some images of that, where they took all the doors that were there, all the bookshelves, and then some they replicated. Some bookshelves they replicated and made mock-ups of them. And so they restored that and put it back into place. And so again, it's money that they decided to spend because they thought it was, you know, keeping, you know, with the tradition of the library and restoring it as opposed to just throwing it away and buying something new. These are those decorative paintings that I talked about, or the ceilings. So that guy up there kind of doing his tests of the colors, doing his tests of what was there. You can see it being uncovered. So on the left, you know, they sort of covered it up and then they took that down and restored it. And there's actually an instance in the library, another room. I don't know if I have it in this presentation, but there's another room that if you visit the library, you'll see that they actually only restored a little piece of it because they didn't have the money to restore the entire room. But they also didn't feel it necessary at that time to spend the money to restore the whole room because it didn't necessarily bring a lot more value to the library at the time. But they did a little piece so that it's sort of a piece of history. So you walk in there and you can sort of see the narrative of the restoration of the library. These stencils, or this painting of these, again, more decorative painting. Another decision that, you know, money played into it. It was too costly to have someone, again, be up there painting all these stencils or these decorative artwork. So they actually created a stencil being something that they sort of can print and then go up there and put in place. And they originally were just going to paint these and not include the stencils. But again, it completely changes the space and the design of the space by including these stencils. And you can see the historic photograph here on the upper right, how the space included these stencils and made it what it is today. Going to the popular collections space. So this ceiling is very intricate. And so it needed some work to be restored. And so again, it's where they came up and went through every crack, put some plaster back up there. And then again, one guy on a scaffolding just up there painting away, creating these spaces. And then children's room. Another example of behind these sort of squares that are in the center of the ceiling are actual murals. And so they decided that, they didn't necessarily have the money at this time to uncover those murals and create those murals, replicate those murals. So what they ended up doing was creating a color scheme and then covering it up so that in the future, when there's some, funding or more money, they can come back and uncover those murals and then restore them to, again, what they used to be. But this is the children's ring, so it's got the lower bookshelves and for children to play and come and spend time. So, and then the central hall. On the left, you can see the historic photograph, and on the right, you can see the new photograph, and you can see that they're pretty much identical. This is one of those areas that it was great back then, it's great now, so why change it? So just restore it to what it was, just do like cosmetic touch-ups, the cracks, the whole flooring, the whole terrazzo flooring in the center was redone. And that was, again, in line with what it used to be. And with that, it brings us to the next polling question. So support for the renovation construction was primarily provided by the state of Maryland, Baltimore City, or donations.
Well, I didn't say these questions were going to be hard.
Just a little something to get your juices flowing. Okay. And we have our answer. The majority of you said the state of Maryland. That is correct. So that's where Christine mentioned that the state of Maryland had the most funding, right? It was that 80 million sort of contract, and then it, some funding from the library and then from donations. Some great donors brought that from 80 million up to 93 million. And then, the addition of the annex was 115 million total. But with that, we'll move into signage and wayfinding, and Lindsay will take that away.
Hi, everyone. So I wanted to talk, Daniel gave you a great holistic view at the renovation of the library, and now we're going to dive into some details as small as signs for each room. Really just kind of painting the picture that, no stone was left unturned. So the big goals of the signage and wayfinding were to improve the visitor experience through use of intuitive wayfinding. This is an old historic building. There's some funny things, that you go into the main central hall, but then you have to kind of go to the back corner and down the stairs to find the children's area, things like that. So we wanted it to be very user intuitive. We wanted to give people the autonomy and the empowerment of, having a sense of comfort, not confusion upon arrival. We also wanted to do that while reducing sign clutter. We wanted to do it in a very efficient and meaningful way as not to add any other noise. Signage is one of those funny things that you don't really notice it until you do, until it's not working. So we really wanted to integrate it with the beautiful historic architecture and also complementing the annex. So the annex was not part of this renovation, but it is part of the library. And it is a section that was done recently. And so they had their own signage system, and we wanted to build upon that so that the central library and the annex didn't look like two separate pieces. We wanted them to work together and complement each other. And then we wanted to design a really beautiful solution, but with the maintenance and the durability of this building being a public space. So, kids, anyone can visit this library. And so there was, the library was telling us stories of, people would go up to the signs and pick off the letters. And so then all of a sudden room 202 was room 10 because there wasn't a 2. So we wanted to make sure that we were designing, again, as Daniel said, a design solution that would last for the next 100 years. So we started and we looked at precedents of other historic buildings. The photo on the left is actually a photo at the Library of Congress. A very similar palette. It was a very big historic building, large ceilings, large marble columns. And what we appreciated about what was done from a signage perspective at this location is that we noticed right off the bat that their signage system was freestanding and separate from the architecture as to preserve the beauty of the historic elements, like the marble columns. So we didn't want to go nailing things and drilling holes into the marble. So we really liked the freestanding aspect of that. The second thing we drew inspiration from was just the really unique and iconic features of this building. This photo in the middle is the decorative, kind of the decorative grill above the main picture window. Once you enter the main entrance of the building. It's right above the main entrance. And we thought that this was such a beautiful design and representation of design at the time that we wanted to somehow incorporate that in the design. We knew that right off the bat. And then we also looked to past projects. Actually, it was mentioned, in my introduction at the very beginning that I had worked on the visitor center at Monticello. And I actually took a lessons learned from that. We again, a public visitor center, anyone can go up to this visitor center, and it needed to have the same durability. So these signs, this little sign there, which is the room sign, was designed out of a material, zinc was the material, and it was actually a reverse etch. So if you imagine one piece of material and you reverse down, you etch down all of the negative space, leaving the kind of elevated protruding elements, the numbers and the letters of what the room is. But that whole thing is one piece of material. So it's not, you know, stick-on letters that someone can pick off. So we went ahead and did that same, made that same choice for the library, made it one material, indestructible. So this was the signage that way back with the addition of the annex. This was the signage that was designed and implemented. And this was designed by a firm called Shermeyeff and Geismar out of New York, a very renowned design firm. And we wanted to, you know, honor that design and carry it over into the main space, but also, you know, give it a little bit of a facelift. We wanted to freshen it up, and so respect the design and take cues from it, but, you know, make it a little bit more befitting of the of 2020 and 100 years beyond. So what we did, Daniel, go to the next slide. What we did is we took the main sign types, and we took different, you know, different elements and design pieces and components of those signs and reinterpreted them. So if you remember the big, beautiful picture window from one of the first slides, we went ahead and vectorized that design element into a strip of raised bronze. Again, all etched out of that zinc material, so kind of like a painted faux bronze. That really kind of mimics the look and the placement of that decorative strip from the signs in the annex, but again, tying in elements from the main central library. So here you'll see the decorative window elements and how they translate into some of the larger signs. The sign on the right is a freestanding stanchion sign, taking cues again from the Library of Congress, and then incorporating the decorative window cut metal into the freestanding sign. And then there were opportunities, just because of the, you know, the history of this building, there were just these beautiful opportunities to incorporate signage within these enclosures and entrances into rooms. So a lot of the main spaces along the main corridors in Central Hall had these inset opportunities above the doors and the entrances to then kind of nest in a beautiful sign. So we had the opportunity to design something that really felt like it belonged in that space, that it didn't look like an add-on. It was, you know, befitting of that that environment. And then that was the Edgar Allan Poe kind of tucked into that little space above the door. We also took that same look and feel and applied it from to some of the mezzanines, which are a very different condition, but kind of hold the same weight of space. You know, the social sciences collection is a destination that people want to find. So for all of these key destinations within the library, we wanted to honor them with, you know, these really beautiful identification signs. So these are suspended above the mezzanines. And then paired with this picture over on the right, these are pin-mounted letters that honor some of the donors in Central Hall. Which again, I know I mentioned not drilling into the marble. These are actually adhered to the marble with a, it's called VHB tape. It's very high bond tape, so they are easily, you can take them off of the marble as well without ruining the marble. So these are a few other opportunities to show off some of the sign types. We saw that freestanding stanchion sign right as you entered Central Hall that gave directions. This is a smaller accompanying stanchion sign which identifies the arrival at one of these smaller locations. So this is a study room beyond it, and then this hallway leads to the administrative suite. And then another opportunity with the teen resource room to nest those signs above those entrances. and then on down to the ADA signage, the room signage. So as I mentioned, and taking cues from Monticello, this sign is just all one piece of material. So virtually completely indestructible. And again, we were able to mimic the look and the feel of some of the materiality found throughout the library. So this has that oil rubbed bronze look with the brass elements to the left there. Just another version of that as well. So halfway through the process, I guess, they're like, oh gosh, we're gonna need a donor wall too. And so we pivoted a little bit and took this opportunity to make something really special to honor all of the donors and all of the gifts that went into this huge project for the city. So the one kind of precedent photo that was brought to us from our clients was this left donor wall, and this was a precedent actually from our local MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art, and they really liked the opportunity to have, you know, donors' names on each panel and have some forward and some back, and we thought that was actually the perfect opportunity to incorporate a very similar material that we had proposed as a team down in the children's area. So the middle photo and all of that kind of meant to mimic like undersea sea grasses and seaweed. But we used a very similar material down in the children's library that we thought we would bring up to Central Hall and use for the donor wall as well. So we went ahead and we studied the precedent photo that they liked for inspiration, incorporated the materials that we were already using in the library. And then the last picture, we wanted to really draw inspiration from those beautiful painted frescoes on the ceiling. So we went ahead and took colors from those frescoes to incorporate. So this was the space that we were given. This is just a collage of a lot of photos showing the same space. So this is actually, if you look at the top middle photo, I guess kind of shows it best. Right in between those columns, you can see an opening. And to the right there, that is where you enter Central Hall. So you enter through this, in between those columns, and then it opens up onto this beautiful, huge open ceiling. And that space right to the left of where you enter, which you can see best in that first photo, there was this glass enclosure spanning those two columns. And with the renovation, we were going to take out that glass enclosure, but still use that space, the space behind it, as a public, like a space where you could go and prep for interviews, like real world interviews, or you could go and have a one-on-one conversation or conference with someone. So we needed to keep the privacy and the enclosure of that space behind the columns. So we knew we wanted to use that space as the donor wall, but we also just needed it to double as like a little bit of a privacy screen to preserve that space beyond. So this was kind of the palette of what we had to work with for the donor wall.
Lindsay?
Yes.
Was any of the signage in Braille? I know you talked about a lot of it being ADA, but
yes, absolutely. So all of the room signage is ADA accessible. So all of it has Braille. You can't see it, but yeah, right under there, you can see the dots. They're just the same color as the background. But yes, all of those signs are in Braille. So this is the space of the donor wall. We decided to put a privacy panel behind it of kind of like a frosted glass. And then we proposed different sizes and different kind of protruding, like in and out fluctuations based on level of gift. So on the next slide, we have kind of our like cheat sheet of like, okay, this donor name is going to be this big, this donor name is going to be this big, and we have it all mapped out. And you can go to the next one, Daniel. And then we did a full-scale paper print to make sure that this was actually going to work in the space. And funny story, this is actually the wall opposite of where it was going to be installed, because in doing this paper print, we realized that we had actually like gotten it wrong, which is why we do these paper prints. But if you'll notice that there's 3 of those backer panels on the left side, and then there's 4 on the right side. And so we realized that we actually had flip-flopped those. So measure twice, cut once. So we got it right for the final install, and everyone was really happy with the final solution. So drawing in those blues and greens and yellows and tans from those frescoes, you really do get a beautiful end result. And what is not shown in this photo, but is existing now, if we were there to see it, is we have this beautiful, very thin rail light that shines down. This material is it's a free-form acrylic, and when it's lit, when the light kind of shines down, it gives this really beautiful effect. So you'll have to go see that in person. And that is that.
And with that, we have I think our final polling question. So the donor wall was an 11th hour. Great idea. True or false?
There's one more after this.
Oh, okay, there's one more. We'll try to go quick through the rest of it because I know we're sort of getting to the end of the time. So, okay. So we got a little bit more. Okay. And so, yes, true. It was an 11th hour. Great idea. And, you know, pretty much everybody answered that correctly. So I'll go through lead and awards. Thank you, Lindsay, for that great narrative and design. So I'll go through the lead and awards real quick, and then kind of want to get to some questions if you have any questions. But yes, the library did achieve LEED Silver, which was a tremendous feat, you know, after having to modernize it and bring it up to speed with all the mechanical equipments, but it did. And there's a lot of stuff that went into it, you know, from daylighting, from water, recycling, abatement, right? So I talked about that, about the, you know, asbestos, and then also just where it's located in the community, traffic and parking, and, you know, whether it has mass transit. So all of that goes into it. But yes, LEED Silver was achieved. And one of those interesting tidbits of how it achieved it was the windows, right? So the windows back in 1930s were single pane. They're not very energy efficient. They let in a lot of cold air or hot air, depending on what season it is. So one of the ingenious ideas is to make it a modern window, right? So, but we couldn't do anything on the exterior because of the historic preservation aspect of it. So everything had to be interior. So they added these storm windows, essentially just another layer of glass with a gap in the middle for insulation properties to then create that sort of modern day window. So the modern day window is, you know, whether it's two panes of glass with a air space in the middle, because air is the best insulator. So that's how your windows at your home are, you know, insulating the house. And, you know, in some places like cold climates, they actually go to triple pane. So that's 3 pieces of glass with 2 layers of air. So this one sort of was mimicking that. And so it's the regular windows that they had in the library, and then the storm window that creates the airspace to do that. But if they needed to access them, these storm windows were able to be removed so that you can actually access the window exterior. Some of the windows were operable. Some of the awards that the library has achieved, the Baltimore Heritage Award, and then there's a few other awards that, you know, we're actually pursuing. So AIA awards and Preservation Maryland Award, a lot of those that are being pursued. If you do want more information on the library, these 2 websites down here on the bottom are great resources from the actual library itself, about the timeline, about the renovation itself. And with that, we get to our final polling question, which is, I wish I would have been able to take the physical tour of the beautiful renovated Enoch Pratt Free Library instead of a virtual one, yes or no? I think this one might be pretty unanimous. So,
I didn't get that polling question added.
Okay.
Use the chat if you need to answer one more.
Okay.
Thank
So, yeah, feel free to answer that one. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions that, you know, you may have about the construction, the signage, anything, contracts.
Daniel, what was your most unexpected cost overrun?
Good question, Joe. So the most unexpected cost overrun was hardware. Hardware as in the door hardware. So the handles and hinges, a lot of people don't necessarily think about that stuff, but it is a big part of design as well. And with the amount of doors that were in the library, it's hard to get it right the first time because there's so many doors, and then technology changes and room changes and design changes throughout the process, that the hardware that you may have selected in the beginning isn't the one that should be going on that door. Access control, so a key card swipe access, does that frame have power installed to it? If it doesn't, well, you need to add power, and that's an electrician, that's another sub. So that's one of those that unexpected cost more than we probably should have. Good question.
One other question, Daniel.
Yep.
I mean, you spent $115 million on the renovation. What would a brand new Pratt library have cost?
That's a good question, Joe. I don't have the exact answer for that, but probably a lot less. It would have probably been cheaper to just demolish the whole thing and build a new one. But again, it wouldn't be in the spirit of restoration and keeping that history alive. It would have been a brand new building. So, and then it couldn't have stayed open as long as it did, or throughout the entire construction process, as building a new building. So.
Someone had put in a pre-question, how has this fabulously renovated space been repurposed due to COVID-19 lockdown affecting the great spaces designed for community group use? We got a message back from Mike Barber, who was the project manager. He said all Pratt buildings are closed and their programs are now being conducted virtually. I'm not aware of any changes to the building spaces or their use. Hopefully the COVID threat will pass at some point and the building will again be used as designed. Thank you for that great question. Well, with that, I thank you for attending our presentation of Behind the Design. And hopefully, as Daniel said in the very beginning, when the Enoch Pratt Free Library opens, please keep in mind this presentation when you visit the library, and you can look up at the ceilings and you can say, I know how that was renewed and revitalized, and I know what's in the basement of this place. And you can think of every one of his slides and Lindsay's slides, and just have a much deeper appreciation of our free library in Baltimore. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.